Shadow Show by Clifford D. Simak. Originally published in the November 1953 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, then again in the September 1955 issue of Fiction Magazine. In 1956, it was included in a collection of the author's short stories entitled Strangers in the Universe, which was republished 5 times by 1963. The story appeared again in selections from Strangers in the Universe in 1968, and that's what I'll be reading from today. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Shadow Show. Bayard Lodge, chief of Life Team Number 3, sat at his desk and stared across it angrily at Kent Forster, the team's psychologist. "The play must go on," said Forster. "I can't be responsible for what might happen if we dropped it even for a night or two. It's the one thing that holds us all together. It is the unifying glue that keeps us sane and preserves our sense of humor, and it gives us something to think about." "I know," said Lodge, "but with Henry dead—" "They'll understand," Forster promised. "I'll talk to them. I know they'll understand." "They'll understand, all right," Lodge agreed. "All of us recognize the necessity of the play, but there is something else. One of those characters was Henry's." Forster nodded. "I've been thinking of that, too." "Do you know which one?" Forster shook his head. "I thought you might," said Lodge. "You've been beating out your brains to get them figured out, to pair up the characters with us." Forster grinned sheepishly. "I don't blame you," said Lodge. "I know why you're doing it." "It would be a help," admitted Forster. "It would give me a key to every person here. Just consider, when a character went illogical—" "They're all illogical," said Lodge. "That's the beauty of them." "But the illogic runs true to a certain zany pattern," Forster pointed out. "You can use that very zaniness and set up a norm." "You've done that?" "Not as a graph," said Forster, "but I have it well in mind. When the illogic deviates, it's not too hard to spot it." "It's been deviating?" Forster nodded. "Sharply at times. The problem that we have, the way that they're thinking—" "Call it attitude," said Lodge. For a moment, the two of them were silent. Then Forster asked, "Do you mind if I ask why you insist on attitude?" "Because it is an attitude," Lodge told him. "It's an attitude conditioned by the life we lead, an attitude traceable to too much thinking, too much searching of the soul. It's an emotional thing, almost a religious thing. There's little of the intellectual in it. We're shut up too tightly, guarded too closely. The importance of our work is stressed too much. We aren't normal humans. We're off balance all the time. How in the world can we be normal humans when we lead no normal life?" "It's a terrible responsibility," said Forster. "They face it each day of their lives." "The responsibility is not theirs." "Only if you agree that the individual counts for less than the race. Perhaps not even then, for there are definite racial implications in this project, implications that can become terribly personal. Imagine making—" "I know," said Lodge impatiently. "I've heard it from every one of them. Imagine making a human being not in the image of humanity." "And yet it would be human," Forster said. "That is the point, Bayard. Not that we would be manufacturing life, but that it would be human life in the shape of monsters. You wake up screaming, dreaming of those monsters. A monster itself would not be bad at all if it were no more than a monster. After centuries of traveling to the stars, we're used to monsters." Lodge cut him off. "Let's get back to the play." We'll have to go ahead, insisted Forrester. There'll be one character missing, Lodge warned him. You know what that might do. It might throw the entire thing off balance, reduce it to confusion. That would be worse than no play at all. Why can't we wait a few days and start over, new again, with a new play, a new set of characters? We can't do that, said Forrester, because each of us has identified himself or herself with a certain character. That character has become a part, an individual part of each of us. We're living split lives, Bayard. We're split personalities. We have to be to live. We have to be because not a single one of us could bear to be himself alone. You're trying to say that we must continue the play as an insurance of our sanity. Something like that. Not so grim as you make it sound. In ordinary circumstances, there'd be no question we could dispense with it. But this is no ordinary circumstance. Every one of us is nursing a guilt complex of horrendous magnitude. The play is an emotional outlet, a letdown from the tension. It gives us something to talk about. It keeps us from sitting around at night washing out the stains of guilt. It supplies the ridiculous in our lives. It is our daily comic strip, our chuckle, or our belly laugh. Lodge got up and paced up and down the room. I said attitude, he declared, and it is an attitude, a silly, crazy attitude. There is no reason for the guilt complex, but they coddle it as if it were a thing that kept them human, as if it might be the one last identity they retain with the outside world and the rest of mankind. They come to me and they talk about it as if I could do something about it, as if I could throw up my hands and say, well, all right then, let's quit, as if I didn't have a job to do. They say we're taking a divine power into our hands, that life came to be by some sort of godly intervention, that it's blasphemous and sacrilegious for mere man to try to duplicate that feat. And there's an answer to that one, a logical answer, but they can't see the logic or won't listen to it. Can man do anything divine? If life is divine, then man cannot create it in his laboratories no matter what he does, cannot put it on a mass production basis. If man can create life out of his chemicals, out of his knowledge, if he can make one living cell by the virtue of his technique and his knowledge, then that will prove divine intervention was unnecessary to the genesis of life. And if we have that proof, if we know that a divine instrumentality is unnecessary for the creation of life, doesn't that very proof and fact rob it of divinity? They're seeking an escape, said Forrester, trying to calm him. Some of them may believe what they say, but there are others who are merely afraid of the responsibility, the moral responsibility. They start thinking how it would be to live with something like that the rest of their lives. You had the same situation 1,000 years ago when men discovered and developed atomic fission. They did it and they shuddered. They couldn't sleep at night. They woke up screaming. They knew what they were doing, that they were unloosing terrible powers, and we know what we're doing. Lodge went back to his desk and sat down. Let me think about it, Kent, he said. You may be right. I don't know. There are so many things that I don't know. I'll be back, said Forrester. He closed the door quietly when he left. 2. The play was a never-ending soap opera. The old red barn extended to unheard reaches of the ridiculous. It had a touch of Oz and a dash of alienness, and it went on and on and on. When you put a group of people on an asteroid, when you throw a space patrol around them, when you lead them to their laboratories and point out the problem to be solved, when you keep them at that problem day after endless day, you must likewise do something to preserve their sanity. To do this, there may be books and music, games, films, dancing of an evening, All the old standby entertainment values the race has used for millennia to forget its troubles. But there comes a time when these amusements fail to serve their purpose, when they're not enough. Then you hunt for something new and novel and basic, for something in which each of the isolated group may participate, something with which they can establish close personal identity and lose themselves, forgetting for a time who they are and what may be their purpose. That's where the play came in. In the olden days, many years before, in the cottages of Europe and the pioneer farmsteads of North America, a father would provide an evening's entertainment for his children by means of shadow pictures. He would place a lamp or candle on a table opposite a blank wall, and sitting between the lamp and wall, he would use his hands to form the shadows of rabbit and of elephant, of horse and man and bear and many other things. For an hour or more, the shadow show would parade across the wall, first one and then another, rabbit nibbling clover, the elephant waving trunk and ears, the wolf howling on a hilltop. The children would sit quiet and spellbound, for these were wondrous things. Later, with the advent of movies and of television, of the comic book and the cheap plastic dime store toy, the shadows were no longer wondrous and were shown no longer. But that is not the point. Take the principle of the shadow pictures, add 1,000 years of know-how, and you have the play. Whether the long-forgotten genius who first conceived the play had ever known of the shadow pictures is something that's not known. But the principle was there. Although the approach was different in that one used his mind and thought instead of just his hands. And instead of rabbits and elephants appearing in one-dimensional black and white, in the play, the characters were as varied as the human mind might make them, since the brain is more facile than the hand, and three-dimensional in full color. The screen was a triumph in electronic engineering, with its memory banks, its rows of sonic tubes, its color selectors, ESP antennae, and other gadgets, but it was the minds of the audience that did the work, supplying the raw material for the play upon the screen. It was the audience that conceived the characters, that led them through their actions, that supplied the lines they spoke. It was the combined will of the audience that supplied the backdrops and dreamed up the properties. At first, the play had been a haphazard thing, with the characters only half developed, playing at cross purposes, without personalities, and little more than cartoons paraded on the stage. At first, the backdrops and the properties were the crazy products of many minds flying off at tangents. At times, no fewer than 3 moons would be in the sky simultaneously, all in different phases. At times, snow would be falling at one end of the stage, and bright sunlight would pour down on palm trees at the other end. But in time, the play developed. The characters grew to full stature without missing arms and legs, acquired personalities, rounded out into full-blown living beings. The background became the result of a combined effort to achieve effective setting rather than 9 different people trying desperately to fill in the blank spots. In time, direction and purpose had been achieved so that the action flowed smoothly, although there never came a time when any of the 9 were sure of what would happen next. That was the fascination of it. New situations were continually being introduced by one character or another, with the result that the human creators of the other characters were faced with the need of new lines and action to meet the changing situations. It became, in a sense, of contest of wills, with each participant seeking advantages for his character, or, on the other hand, forced to backtrack to escape disaster. It became, after a time, a never-ending chess game in which each player pitted himself or herself against the other 8. And no one knew, of course, to whom any of the characters belonged. Out of this grew up a lively guessing game and many jokes and sallies, and this was to the good, for that was what the play was for, to lift the minds of the participants out of their daily work and worries. Each evening after dinner, the 9 gathered in the theater, and the screen sprang into life, and the 9 characters performed their parts and spoke their lines. The defenseless orphan, the mustached villain, the proper young man, the beautiful bitch, the alien monster, and all the others. 9 of them, 9 men and women, and 9 characters. But now there would be only 8, for Henry Griffith had died, slumped against his bench with the notebook at his elbow. And the play would have to go on with one missing character, the character that had been controlled and motivated by the man who was now dead. Lodge wondered which character would be the missing one. Not the defenseless orphan, certainly, for that would not have been down Henry's alley, but it might be the proper young man, or the out-at-elbows philosopher, or the rustic slicker. "Wait a minute there," said Lodge. "Not the rustic slicker. The rustic slicker's me." He sat idly speculating on which belonged to whom. It would be exactly like Sue Lawrence to dream up the beautiful bitch, a character as little like her prim, practical self as one could well imagine. He remembered that he had taunted her once concerning his suspicion, and that she had been very cold to him for several days thereafter. Forster said the play must go on, and maybe he was right. They might adjust. God knows they should be able to adjust to anything after participating in the play each evening for months on end. It was a zany thing, all right, never getting anywhere. Not even episodic, for it never had a chance to become episodic. Let one trend develop, and some joker was sure to throw in a stumbling block that upset the trend and sent the action angling off in some new direction. With that kind of goings-on, he thought, the disappearance of a single character shouldn't throw them off their stride. He got up from his desk and walked to the great picture window. He stood there looking out at the bleak loneliness of the asteroid. The curved roofs of the research center fell away beneath him, shining in the starlight to the blackness of the cragged surface. Above the jagged northern horizon lay a flush of light, and in a little while it would be dawn, with the weak, watch-sized sun sailing upward to shed its feeble light upon this tiny speck of rock. He watched the flushed horizon, remembering Earth, where dawn was morning and sunset marked the beginning of the night. Here no such scheme was possible, for the days and nights were so erratic and so short that they could not be used to divide one's time. Here morning came at a certain hour, evening came at another hour, regardless of the sun, and one might sleep out a night with the sun high in the sky. It would have been different, he thought, if we could have stayed on Earth, for there we would have had normal human contacts. We would not have thought so much or brooded. We could have rubbed away the guilt on the hides of other people. But normal human contacts would have meant the start of rumors, would have encouraged leaks, and in a thing of this sort there could be no leaks. For if the people of the Earth knew what they were doing, or more correctly, what they were trying to do, they would raise a hubbub that might result in calling off the project. Even here, he thought, even here there are those who have their doubts and fears. A human being must walk upon 2 legs and have 2 arms, and a pair of eyes, a brace of ears, 1 nose, 1 mouth, be not unduly hairy. He must walk. He must not hop or crawl or slither. A perversion of the human form, they said, a scraping of human dignity, a going too far, farther than man in all his arrogance was ever meant to go. There was a rap upon the door. Lodge turned and called, "Come in." It was Dr. Susan Lawrence. She stood in the open doorway, a stolid, dumpy, dowdy woman with an angular face that had a set of stubbornness and of purpose in it. She did not see him for a moment and stood there, turning her head, trying to find him in the dusky room. "Over here, Sue," he called. She closed the door and crossed the room and stood by his side looking out the window. Finally, she said, "There was nothing wrong with him, Bayard, nothing organically wrong. I wonder—" She stood there silent, and Lodge could feel the practical bleakness of her thoughts. "It's bad enough," she said, "when they die and you know what killed them. It's not so bad to lose them if you've had a fighting chance to save them. But this is different. He just toppled over. He was dead before he hit the bench." "You've examined him?" She nodded. "I put him in the analyzers. I've got 3 reels of stuff. I'll check it all later, but I'll swear there was nothing wrong." She reached out a hand and put it on his arm, her pudgy fingers tightening. "He didn't want to live," she said. "He was afraid to live. He thought he was close to finding something, and he was afraid to find it." "We have to find it, Sue." "For what?" she asked. "So we can fashion humans to live on planets where humans in their present form wouldn't have a chance? So we can take a human mind and spirit and enclose it in a monster's body, hating itself?" "It wouldn't hate itself," Lodge told her. "You're thinking in anthropomorphic terms. A thing is never ugly to itself because it knows itself. Have we any proof that bipedal man is any happier than an insect or a toad?" "But why?" she persisted. "We do not need those planets. We have more now than we can colonize. Enough Earth-type planets to last for centuries. We'll be lucky if we even colonize them all, let alone develop them in the next 500 years. "We can't take the chance," he said. "We must take control while we have the chance. It was all right when we were safe and snug on Earth, but that is true no longer. We've gone out to the stars. Somewhere in the universe there are other intelligences. There have to be. Eventually we'll meet. We must be in a strong position. And to get into that strong position, we plant colonies of human monsters. I know, Bayard. It's clever. We can design the bodies, the flesh and nerves and muscles, the organs of communication, all designed to exist upon a planet where a normal human could not live a minute. We are clever, all right, and very good technicians, but we can't breathe the life into them. There's more to life than just the colloidal combination of certain elements. There's something else, and we'll never get it." "We will try," said Lodge. "You'll drive good technicians out of their sanity," she said. "You'll kill some of them, not with your hands, but with your insistence. You'll keep them cooped up for years, and you'll give them a play so they'll last the longer. But you won't find life, for life is not man's secret. Want to bet?" he asked, laughing at her fury. She swung around and faced him. "There are times," she said, "when I regret my oath. A little cyanide." He caught her by the arm and walked her to the desk. "Let's have a drink," he said. "You can kill me later." 3. They dressed for dinner. That was a rule. They always dressed for dinner. It was, like the play, one of the many little habits that they cultivated to retain their sanity, not to forget that they were a cultured people as well as ruthless seekers after knowledge, a knowledge that any one of them would have happily forsworn. They laid aside their scalpels and their other tools. They boxed their microscopes. They ranged the culture bottles neatly in place. They put the pans of saline solutions and their varying contents carefully away. They took their aprons off and went out and shut the door, and for a few hours they forgot, or tried to forget, who they were and what their labors were. They dressed for dinner and assembled in the so-called drawing room for cocktails, and then went in to dinner, pretending that they were no more than normal human beings, and no less. The table was set with exquisite china and fragile glass, and there were flowers and flaming tapers. They began with an entree, and their meal was served in courses by accomplished robots, and they ended with cheese and fruit and brandy, and there were cigars for those who wanted them. Lodge sat at the table's head and looked down the table at them, and for a moment saw Sue Lawrence looking back at him, and wondered if she were scowling or if the seeming scowl was no more than the play of candlelight upon her face. They talked as they always talked at dinner, the inconsequential social chatter of people without worry and with little purpose, for this was the moment of forgetting and escape. This was the hour to wash away the guilt and to ignore the stain. But tonight, he noticed they could not pull themselves away entirely from the happenings of the day, for there was talk of Henry Griffith and of his sudden dying, and they spoke of him in soft tones and with strained and sober faces. Henry had been too intense and too strange a man for anyone to know him well, but they held him in high regard, and although the robots had been careful to arrange the seating so his absence left no gap, there was a real and present sense that one of them was missing. Chester Sifford said to Lodge, "We'll be sending Henry back." Lodge nodded. "We'll call in one of the patrol, and it'll take him back to Earth. We'll have a short service for him here." "But who?" "Craven, more than likely. He was closer to Henry than any of the rest. I spoke to him about it. He agreed to say a word or two." "Some nephews and nieces, maybe a brother or sister. That would be all, I think." Hugh Maitland said, "I understand we'll continue with the play." "That's right," Lodge told him. "Kent recommended it, and I agreed. Kent knows what's best for us." Sifford agreed. "That's his job. He's a good man at it." "I think so, too," said Maitland. "Most psych men stand outside the group, posing as your conscience, but Kent doesn't work that way." "He's a chaplain," Sifford said. "Just a goddamn chaplain." Helen Gray sat to the left, and Lodge saw that she was not talking with anyone, but only staring at the bowl of roses which this night served as a centerpiece. Tough on her, he thought, for she had been the one who had found Henry dead, and thinking that he was merely sleeping, had taken him by the shoulder and shaken him to wake him. Down at the other end of the table, sitting next to Forrester, Alice Page was talking far too much more than she had ever talked before, for she was a strangely reserved woman, with a quiet beauty that had a touch of darkness in it. Now she leaned toward Forrester, talking tensely, as if she might be arguing in a low tone so the others would not hear her, with Forrester listening, his face masked with patience against a feeling of alarm. "They are upset," thought Lodge, "far more than I had suspected, upset and edgy, ready to explode." Henry's death had hit them harder than he knew. Not a lovable man, Henry still had been one of them. One of them, he thought. Why not one of us? But that was the way it always was. Unlike Forrester, who did his best work by being one of them, he must stand to one side, must keep intact that slight, cold margin of reserve, which was all that preserved against an incident of crisis the authority which was essential to his job. Sifford said, "Henry was close to something. So Sue told me." "He was writing up his notes when he died," said Sifford. "It may be... We'll have a look at them," Lodge promised. "All of us together, in a day or two." Maitland shook his head. We'll never find it, Bayard. Not the way we're working, not in the direction we are working. We have to take a new approach. Sifford bristled. What kind of approach? I don't know, said Maitland. If I knew... Gentlemen, said Lodge. Sorry, Sifford said. I'm a little jumpy. Lodge remembered Dr. Susan Lawrence standing with him, looking out the window at the bleakness of the tumbling hunk of rock on which they lived, and saying he didn't want to live. He was afraid to live. What had she been trying to tell him? That Henry Griffith had died of intellectual fear? That he had died because he was afraid to live? Would it actually be possible for a psychosomatic syndrome to kill a man? 4. You could feel the tension in the room when they went to the theater, although they did their best to mask the tension. They chatted and pretended to be light-hearted, and Maitland tried a joke which fell flat upon its face and died, squirming beneath the insincerity of the laughter that its telling had called forth. Kent was wrong, Lodge told himself, feeling a wave of terror washing over him. This business was loaded with deadly psychological dynamite. It would not take much to trigger it, and it could set off a chain reaction that could wash up the team. And if the team were wrecked, the work of years was gone, the long years of education, the necessary months to get them working together, the constant, never-ending battle to keep them happy and from one another's throats. Gone would be the team confidence, which over many months had replaced individual confidence and doubt. Gone would be the smooth cooperation and coordination which worked like meshing gears. Gone would be a vast percentage of the actual work they'd done, for no other team, no matter how capable it might be, could take up where another team left off, even with the notes of the first team to guide them on their way. The curving screen covered one end of the room, sunken into the wall, with the flare of the narrow stage in front of it. Back of that, thought Lodge, the tubes and generators, the sonics and computers, mechanical magic which turned human thought and will into the moving images that would parade across the screen. Puppets, he thought, puppets of the human mind, but with a strange and startling humanity about them that could not be achieved by carven hunks of wood. And the difference, of course, was the difference between the mind and hand, for no knife, no matter how sharp, guided by no matter how talented and artistic a hand, could carve a dummy with half the precision or fidelity with which the mind could shape a human creature. First, man had created with hands alone, chipping the flint, carving out the bow and dish. Then he achieved machines which were extensions of his hands, and they turned out artifacts which the hands alone were incapable of making. And now man created not with his hands nor with extensions of his hands, but with his mind and extensions of his mind, although he still must use machinery to translate and project the labor of his brain. Someday, he thought, it will be mind alone, without the aid of machines, without the help of hands. The screen flickered, and there was a tree upon it, then another tree, a bench, a duck pond, grass, a distant statue, and behind it all the dim, tree-broken outlines of city towers. That was where they had left it the night before, with the cast of characters embarked upon a picnic in a city park, a picnic that was almost certain to remain a picnic for mere moments only before someone should turn it into something else. Tonight, he hoped, they'd let it stay a picnic, let it run its course, take it easy for a change, not try any fancy stuff. For tonight, of all nights, there must be no sudden jolts, no terrifying turns. A mind forced to guide its character through the intricacies of a suddenly changed plot or some outlandish situation might crack beneath the effort. As it was, there'd be one missing character, and much would depend upon which one it was. The scene stood empty, like a delicate painting of a park in springtime, with each thing fixed in place. Why were they waiting? What were they waiting for? They had set the stage. What were they waiting for? Someone thought of a breeze, and you could hear the whisper of it, moving in the trees, ruffling the pond. Lodge brought his character into mind and walked him on the stage, imagining his gangling walk, the grass stem stuck in his mouth, the curl of unbarbered hair above his collar. Someone had to start it off. Someone. The rustic slicker turned and hustled back off stage. He hustled back again, carrying a great hamper. "Forgot my basket," he said with rural sheepishness. Someone tittered in the darkened room. Thank God for that titter. It is going all right. Come on, the rest of you. The out-at-elbows philosopher strode on stage. He was a charming fellow with no good intent at all. A cadger, a bum, a full-fledged four-flusher, behind the facade of his flowered waistcoat, the senatorial bearing, the long, white, curling locks. "My friend," he said, "my friend." "You ain't my friend," the rustic slicker told him, "till you pay me back my $300. Come on, the rest of you. The beautiful bitch showed up with the proper young man, who any moment now was about to get dreadfully disillusioned. The rustic slicker had squatted on the grass and opened his hamper. He began to take out stuff: a ham, a turkey, a cheese, a vacuum jug, a bowl of Jell-O, a tin of kippered herring. The beautiful bitch made exaggerated eyes at him and wiggled her hips. The rustic slicker blushed, ducking his head. Kent yelled from the audience, "Go ahead and ruin him." Everyone laughed. It was going to be all right. It would be all right. Get the audience and the players kidding back and forth, and it was bound to be all right. "I think that's a good idea, honey," said the beautiful bitch. "I do believe I will." She advanced upon the slicker. The slicker, with his head still ducked, kept on taking things out of the hamper, more by far than could have been held in any 10 such hampers. He took out rings of bologna, stacks of wieners, mounds of marshmallows, a roast goose, and a diamond necklace. The beautiful bitch pounced on the necklace, shrieking with delight. The out-at-elbows philosopher had jerked a leg off the turkey and was eating it, waving it between bites to emphasize the flowery oration he had launched upon. "My friends," he orated between bites, "my friends, in this vernal season it is right and proper. I said, right and proper, sir, that a group of friends should foregather to commune with nature in her gayest aspects, finding retreat such as this even in the heart of a heartless city." He would go on like that for hours, unless something intervened to stop him. The situation being as it was, something was almost bound to stop him. Someone had put a sportive, if miniature, whale into the pond, and the whale, acting much more like a porpoise than a whale, was leaping about in graceful curves and scaring the hell out of the flock of ducks which resided on the pond. The alien monster sneaked in and hid behind a tree. You could see with half an eye that he was bent upon no good. "Watch out!" yelled someone in the audience, but the actors paid no attention to the warning. There were times when they could be incredibly stupid. The defenseless orphan came on stage on the arm of the mustached villain, and there was no good intent in that situation either, with the extraterrestrial ally trailing along behind them. "Where is the sweet young thing?" asked the mustached villain. "She's the only one who's missing." "She'll be along," said the rustic slicker. I saw her at the corner saloon building up a load. The philosopher stopped his oration in mid-sentence, halted the turkey drumstick in mid-air. His silver mane did its best to bristle, and he whirled upon the rustic slicker. "You are a cad, sir," he said, "to say a thing like that, a most contemptible cad." "Well, I don't care," said the slicker. "No matter what you say, that's what she was doing." "You lay off him," shrilled the beautiful bitch, fondling the diamond necklace. "He's my friend, and you can't call him a cad." "Now, BB," protested the proper young man, "you keep out of this." She spun on him. "You shut your mouth," she said. "You mealy hypocrite. Don't you tell me what to do. Too nice to call me by my rightful name, but using just initials. You prissy-panted highbinder, don't you speak to me." The philosopher stepped ponderously forward, stooped down, and swung his arm. The half-eaten drumstick took the slicker squarely across the chops. The slicker rose slowly to his feet, one hand grasping the roast goose. "So you want to play?" he said. He hurled the goose at the philosopher. It struck squarely on the flowered waistcoat. It was greasy, and it splashed. "Oh, Lord," thought Lodge. "Now the fat's in the fire for sure. Why did the philosopher act the way he did? Why couldn't they have left it a simple friendly picnic, just this once? Why did the person whose character the philosopher was make him swing that drumstick? And why had he, Bayard Lodge, made the slicker throw the goose? He went cold all over at the question, and when the answer came, he felt a hand reach into his belly and start twisting at his guts. For the answer was, he hadn't. He hadn't made the slicker throw the goose. He'd felt a flare of anger and a hard, cold hatred, but he had not willed his character to retaliatory action. He kept watching the screen, seeing what was going on, but with only half his mind, while the other half quarreled with itself and sought an explanation. It was the machine that was to blame. It was the machine that had made the slicker throw the goose, for the machine would know, almost as well as a human knew, the reaction that would follow a blow upon the face. The machine had acted automatically, without waiting for the human thought. Sure, perhaps, of what the human thought would be. "It's logical," said the arguing part of his mind. "It's logical that the machine would know, and logical once again that, being sure of knowing, it would react automatically." The philosopher had stepped cautiously backward after he had struck the blow, standing at attention, presenting arms, after a manner of speaking, with the mangy drumstick. The beautiful bitch clapped her hands and cried, "Now you all gotta fight a duel." "Precisely, miss," said the philosopher, still stiffly at attention. "Why else do you think I struck him?" The goose grease dripped slowly off his ornate vest, but you never would have guessed for so much as an instant that he thought he was anything but faultlessly turned out. "But it should have been a glove," protested the proper young man. "I didn't have a glove, sir," said the philosopher, speaking a truth that was self-evident. "It's frightfully improper," persisted the proper young man. The mustached villain flipped back his coattails and, reaching into his back pockets, brought out 2 pistols. "I always carry them," he said with a frightful leer, "for occasions such as this." "We have to break it up," thought Lodge. "We have to stop it. We can't let it go on." He made the rustic slicker say, "Now look at here, now. I don't want to fool around with firearms. Someone might get hurt." "You have to fight," said the leering villain, holding both pistols in one hand and twirling his mustaches with the other. "He has the choice of weapons," observed the proper young man. As the challenged party, the beautiful bitch stopped clapping her hands. "You keep out of this," she screamed. "You sissy, you just don't want to see them fight." The villain bowed. "The slicker has the choice," he said. The extraterrestrial ally piped up. "This is ridiculous," it said. "All you humans are ridiculous." The alien monster struck his head out from behind the tree. "Leave 'em alone," he bellowed in his frightful brogue. "If they want to fight, let 'em go ahead and fight." Then he curled himself into a wheel by the simple procedure of putting his tail into his mouth and started to roll. He rolled around the duck pond at a fearful pace, chanting all the while, "Leave 'em fight, leave 'em fight, leave 'em fight." Then he popped behind his tree again. The defenseless orphan complained, "I thought this was a picnic." And so did all the rest of us, thought Lodge. Although you could have bet, even before it started, that it wouldn't stay a picnic. "Your choice, please," said the villain to the slicker, far too politely. "Pistols, knives, swords, battle-axes." Ridiculous, thought Lodge. Make it ridiculous. He made the slicker say, "Pitchforks at 3 paces." The sweet young thing tripped lightly on the stage. She was humming a drinking song, and you could see that she'd picked up quite a glow. But she stopped at what she saw before her, the philosopher dripping goose grease, the villain clutching a pistol in each hand, the beautiful bitch jangling a diamond necklace, and she asked, "What is going on here?" The out-at-elbows philosopher relaxed his pose and rubbed his hands together with smirking satisfaction. "Now," he said, oozing good fellowship and cheer, "isn't this a cozy situation? All 9 of us are here." In the audience, Alice Page leaped to her feet, put her hands up to her face, pressed her palms tight against her temples, closed her eyes quite shut, and screamed and screamed and screamed. 5. There had been not 8 characters, but 9. Henry Griffith's character had walked on with the rest of them. "You're crazy, Bayard," Forrester said. "When a man is dead, he's dead. Whether he still exists or not, I don't profess to know. But if he does exist, it is not on the level of his previous existence. It is on another plane, in another state of being, in another dimension. Call it what you will, religionist or spiritualist, the answer is the same." Lodge nodded his agreement. "I was grasping at straws, trying to dredge up every possibility. I know that Henry's dead. I know the dead stay dead. And yet you'll have to admit it is a natural thought. Why did Alice scream? Not because the 9 characters were there, but because of why there might be 9 of them. The ghost in us dies hard." "It is not only Alice," Forrester told him. "It's all the others, too. If we don't get this business under control, there'll be a flare-up." The emotional index was already stretched pretty thin when this happened. Doubt over the purpose of the research, the inevitable wear and tear of 9 people living together for months on end, a sort of cabin fever. It all built up. I've watched it building up, and I've held my breath. "Some joker out there subbed for Henry," Lodge said. "How does that sound to you? Someone handled his own character and Henry's too." "No one could handle more than one character," said Forrester. "Someone put a whale into that duck pond." "Sure, but it didn't last long. The whale jumped a time or 2 and then was gone. Whoever put it there couldn't keep it there." "We all cooperate on the setting and the props. Why couldn't someone pull quietly out of that cooperation and concentrate all his mind on two characters? Forrester looked doubtful. I suppose it could be done, but the second character probably would be out of whack. Did you notice any of them that seemed a little strange? I don't know about strange, said Lodge, but the alien monster hid. Henry's character wasn't the alien monster. How can you be sure? Henry wasn't the kind of man to cook up an alien monster. All right, then, which one is Henry's character? Forrester slapped the arm of his chair impatiently. I've told you, Bayard, that I don't know who any of them are. I've tried to match them up, and it can't be done. It would help if we knew. Especially Henry's character, said Forrester. He left the chair and paced up and down the office. Your theory of some joker putting on Henry's character is all wrong, he said. How would he know which one? Lodge raised his hand and smote the desk. The sweet young thing, he shouted. What's that? The sweet young thing. She was the last to walk on. Don't you remember? The mustached villain asked where she was, and the rustic slicker said he saw her in a saloon, and... Good Lord, breathed Forrester. And the out-at-elbows philosopher was at great pains to announce that all of them were there, needling us, jeering at us. You think the philosopher is the one, then? He's the joker, the one who produced the sweet young thing, the ninth member of the cast. The ninth one to appear would have to be Henry's character, don't you see? You said yourself it couldn't be done because you wouldn't know which one it was. But you could know. You'd know when 8 were on the stage that the missing one was Henry's character. Either there was a joker, Forrester said, or the cast itself is somehow sentient, has come halfway alive. Lodge scowled. I can't buy that one, Kent. They're images of our minds. We call them up, we put them through their paces, we dismiss them. They depend utterly on us. They couldn't have a separate identity. They're creatures of our mind, and that is all. It wasn't exactly along that line that I was thinking, said Forrester. I was thinking of the machine itself. It takes the impressions from our minds and shapes them. It translates what we think into the images on the screen. It transforms our thoughts into seeming actualities. A memory. I think the machine may have a memory, Forrester declared. God knows it has enough sensitive equipment packed into it to have almost anything. The machine does more of it than we do. It contributes more than we do. After all, we're the same drab old mortals that we always were. We've just got clever, that is all. We built extensions of ourselves. The machine is an extension of our imagery. I don't know, protested Lodge. I simply do not know. This going around in circles, this incessant speculation. But he did know, he told himself. He did know that the machine could act independently, for it had made the slicker throw the goose, but that was different from handling a character from scratch, different from putting on a character that should not appear. It had simply been a matter of an induced automatic action, and it didn't mean a thing. Or did it? The machine could walk on Henry's character, Forrester persisted. It could have the philosopher mock us? But why? Asked Lodge, and even as he asked it, he knew why the machine might do just that, and the thought of it made icy worms go crawling up his back. To show us, Forrester said, that it was sentient, too. But it wouldn't do that, Lodge argued. If it were sentient, it would keep quiet about it. That would be its sole defense. We could smash it. We probably would smash it if we thought it had come alive. We could dismantle it. We could put an end to it. He sat in the silence that fell between them and felt the dread that had settled on this place, a strange dread compounded of an intellectual and moral doubt, of a man who had fallen dead, of one character too many, of the guarded loneliness that hemmed in their lives. "I can't think," he said. "Let's sleep on it." "Okay," said Forster. "A drink?" Forster shook his head. "He's glad to drop it, too," thought Lodge. "He's glad to get away." Like a hurt animal, he thought. All of us, like hurt animals, crawling off to be alone, sick of one another, poisoned by the same faces eternally sitting across the table or meeting in the halls, of the same mouths saying the same inane phrases over and over again until, when you meet the owner of a particular mouth, you know before he says it what he is going to say. "Good night, Bayard." "Night, Kent. Sleep tight." "See you." "Sure," said Lodge. The door shut softly. "Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite." 6. He woke, screaming in the night. He sat bolt upright in the middle of the bed and searched with numbed mind for the actuality, slowly, clumsily separating the actuality from the dream, becoming aware again of the room he slept in, of the furniture, of his own place and who he was and what he did and why he happened to be there. It was all right, he told himself. It had been just a dream. The kind of dream that was common here, the kind of dream that everyone was having. The dream of walking down a street or road, or walking up a staircase, of walking almost anywhere, and of meeting something, a spider-like thing, or a worm-like thing, or a squatting monstrosity with horns and drooling mouth, or perhaps something such as could be fabricated only in a dream and have it stop and say hello and chat, for it was human, too, just the same as you. He sat and shivered at the memory of the one he'd met, of how it had put a hairy, taloned claw around his shoulder, of how it had drooled upon him with great affection, and had asked him if he had had the time to catch a drink, because it had a thing or two it wanted to talk with him about. Its odor had been overpowering and its shape obscene, and he'd tried to shrink from it and had tried to run from it, but could neither shrink nor run, for it was a man like him, clothed in different flesh. He swung his legs off the bed and found his slippers with searching toes and scuffed his feet into them. He found his robe and stood up and put it on and went out to the office. There he mixed himself a drink. Sleep tight, he thought. God, how can a man sleep tight? Now it's got me as well as all the others. The guilt of it, the guilt of what mankind meant to do. Although, despite the guilt, there was a lot of logic in it. There were planets upon which no human could have lived for longer than a second because of atmospheric pressure, because of overpowering gravity, because of lack of atmosphere or poison atmosphere, or because of any one or any combination of 100 other reasons. And yet, those planets had economic and strategic value, every one of them. Some of them had both great economic and great strategic value. And if man were to hold the galactic empire which he was carving out against the possible appearance of some as yet unknown alien foe, he must man all economic and strategic points, must make full use of all the resources of his new empire. For that, somewhere in the galaxy there were other intelligences as yet unmet by men, there could be little doubt. The sheer mathematics of pure chance said there had to be. Given an infinite space, the possibility of such an intelligence also neared infinity. Friend or foe, You couldn't know, but you couldn't take a chance. So you planned and built against the day of meeting. And in such a meeting, to bypass planets of economic and strategic value was sheer insanity. Human colonies must be planted on those planets, must be planted there and grow against the day of meeting so that their numbers and their resources and their positioning in space might be thrown into the struggle if the struggle came to be. And if man, in his natural form, could not exist there, why, then you changed his form. You manufactured bodies that could live there, that could fit into the planet's many weird conditions, that could live on those planets and grow and build and carry out man's plans. Man could build those bodies. He had the technique to compound the flesh and bone and nerve. He had the skill to duplicate the mechanisms that produce the hormones. He had ferreted out the secrets of the enzymes and the amino acids and had at his fingertips all the other knowledge of how to construct a body. Any body, not just a human body. Biological engineering had become an exact science, and biological blueprints could be drawn up to meet any conceivable set of planetary conditions. Man was all set to go on his project for colonization by humans in strange, non-human forms. Ready except for one thing. He could make everything but life. Now, the search for life went on, a top priority, highly classified research program carried out here and on other asteroids with the teams of biochemists, metabolists, endocrinologists, and others isolated on the tumbling slabs of rock, guarded by military patrols operating out in space, hemmed in by a million regulations and uncounted security checks. They sought for life, working down in that puzzling gray area where non-life was separated from life by a shadow zone and a strange unpredictability that was enough to drive one mad, working with the viruses and crystals which at one moment might be dead and the next moment half alive, and no man as yet who could tell why this was or how it came about. That there was a definite key to life hidden somewhere against man's searching was a belief that never wavered in the higher echelons, but on the guarded asteroids there grew up a strange and perhaps unscientific belief that life was not a matter of fact to be pinned down by formula or equation, but rather a matter of spirit, with some shading to the supernatural, that it was not something that man was ever meant to know, that to seek it was presumptuous and perhaps sacrilegious, that it was a tangled trap into which man had lured himself by his madcap hunt for knowledge. And I, thought Bayard Lodge, I am one of those who drive them on in this blind and crazy search for a thing that we were never meant to find, that for our peace of mind and for our security of soul we never should have sought. I reason with them when they whisper out their fears. I kid them out of it when they protest the inhumanity of the course we plan. I keep them working, and I kill each of them just a little every day. Kill the humanity of them inch by casual inch, and I wake up screaming because a human thing I met put its arm around me and asked me to have a drink with it. He finished off his drink and poured another one, and this time did not bother with the mix. "Come on," he said to the monster of the dream. "Come on, friend. I'll have that drink with you." He gulped it down and did not notice the harshness of the uncut liquor. "Come on," he shouted at the monster. "Come on and have that drink with me." He stared around the room, waiting for the monster. "What the hell?" he said. "We're all human, aren't we?" He poured another one and held it in a fist that suddenly was shaky. "Us humans, he said, still talking to the monster, have got to stick together. 7. All of them met in the lounge after breakfast, and Lodge, looking from face to face, saw the terror that lay behind the masks they kept in front of them, could sense the unvoiced shrieking that lay inside of them, held imprisoned by the iron control of breeding and of discipline. Kent Forster carefully lit a cigarette, and when he spoke, his voice was conversationally casual, and Lodge, watching him as he talked, knew the price he paid to keep his voice casual. "This is something," Forrester said, "that we can't allow to keep on eating on us. We have to talk it out." "You mean rationalize it?" asked Sifford. Forrester shook his head. "Talk it out," I said. "This is once we can't kid ourselves." "There were 9 characters last night," said Craven. "And a whale," said Forrester. "You mean one of... I don't know. If one of us did, let's speak up and say so. There's not a one among us who can't appreciate a joke." "A grisly joke," said Craven. "But a joke," said Forrester. "I would like to think it was a joke," Maitland declared. "I'd feel a lot easier if I knew it was a joke." "That's the point," said Forrester. "That's what I'm getting at." He paused a moment. "Anyone?" he asked. No one said a word. They waited. "No one, Kent," said Lodge. "Perhaps the Joker doesn't want to reveal himself," said Forster. "I think all of us could understand that. Maybe we could hand out slips of paper." "Hand them out," Sifford grumbled. Forster took sheets of folded paper from his pocket, carefully tore the strips. He handed out the strips. "If anyone played a joke," Lodge pleaded, "for God's sake, let us know." The slips came back. Some of them said, "No." Others said, "No joke." One said, "I didn't do it." Forrester wadded up the strips. "Well, that lets that idea out," he said. "I must admit I didn't have much hope." Craven lumbered to his feet. "There's one thing that all of us have been thinking," he said, "and it might as well be spoken. It's not a pleasant subject." He paused and looked around him at the others, as if defying them to stop him. "No one liked Henry too well," he said. "Don't deny it. He was a hard man to like. A hard man any way you look at him. I was closer to him than any of you. I've agreed to say a few words for him at the service this afternoon. I'm glad to do it, for he was a good man despite his hardness. He had a tenacity of will, a stubbornness such as you seldom find even in a hard man. And he had moral scruples that none of us could guess. He would talk to me a little, really talk, and that's something that he never did with the rest of you. Henry was close to something. He was scared. He died. There was nothing wrong with him." Craven looked at Dr. Lawrence. "Was there, Susan?" he asked. "Was there anything wrong with him?" "Not a thing," said Dr. Susan Lawrence. "He should not have died." Craven turned to Lodge. "He talked with you recently." "A day or 2 ago," said Lodge. "He seemed quite normal then." "What did he talk about?" "Oh, the usual things. Minor matters." "Minor matters?" Mocking. "All right, then, if you want it that way. He talked about not wanting to go on. He said our work was unholy. That's the word he used, unholy." Lodge looked around the room. That's one the rest of you have never thought to use. Unholy. He was more insistent than usual? Well, no, said Lodge. It was the first time he had ever talked to me about it, the only person engaged in the research here, I believe, who had not talked with me about it at one time or another. And you talked him into going back. We discussed it. You killed the man. Perhaps, said Lodge. Perhaps I'm killing all of you. Perhaps you're killing yourselves and I myself. How am I to know? He said to Dr. Lawrence, Sue, could a man die of psychosomatic illness brought about by fear? Clinically, no, said Susan Lawrence. Practically, I'm afraid the answer might be yes. He was trapped, said Craven. Mankind's trapped, snapped Lodge. If you must point your finger, point it at all of us. Point it at the whole community of man. I don't think, Forrester interrupted, that this is pertinent. It is, insisted Craven, and I will tell you why. I'd be the last to admit the existence of a ghost. Alice Page came swiftly to her feet. Stop it, she cried. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Miss Page, please, said Craven. But you're saying... I'm saying that if there ever was a situation where a departed spirit had a motive, and I might even say a right, to come back and haunt his place of death, this is it. Sit down, Craven, Lodge commanded sharply. Craven hesitated angrily, then sat down, grumbling to himself. Lodge said, If there's any point in continuing the discussion along these lines, I insist that it be done objectively. Maitland said, There's no point to it, I can see. As scientists who are most intimately concerned with life, we must recognize that death is an utter ending. That, objected Sifford, is open to serious question, and you know it. Forrester broke in, his voice cool. Let's defer the matter for a moment. We can come back to it. There is another thing. He hurried on. Another thing that we should know. Which of the characters was Henry's character? No one said a word. I don't mean, said Forrester, to try to find which belonged to whom, but by a process of elimination. All right, said Sifford. Hand out the slips again. Forrester brought out the paper in his pocket, tore more strips. Craven protested. Not just slips, he said. I won't fall for a trick like that. Forrester looked up from the slips. Trick? Of course, said Craven harshly. Don't deny it. You've been trying to find out. I don't deny it, Forrester told him. I'd have been derelict in my duty if I hadn't tried. Lodge said, I wonder why we keep this secret thing so closely to ourselves. It might be all right under normal circumstances, but these aren't normal circumstances. I think it might be best if we made a clean breast of it. I, for one, am willing. I'll lead off if you only say the word. He waited for the word. There was no word. They all stared back at him, and there was nothing in their faces. No anger, no fear, nothing at all that a man could read. Lodge shrugged the defeat from his shoulders. He said to Craven, All right, then. What were you saying? I was saying that if we wrote down the names of our characters, it would be no better than standing up and shouting them aloud. Forrester knows our handwriting. He could spot every slip. Forrester protested. I hadn't thought of it. I ask you to believe I hadn't. But what Craven says is true. All right, then? Asked Lodge. Ballots, Craven said. Fix up ballots with the characters' names upon them. Aren't you afraid we might be able to identify your exes? Craven looked levelly at Lodge. "Since you mention it, I might be," Forrester said wearily. "We have a batch of dyes down in the labs used for stamping specimens. I think there's an X among them." "That would satisfy you?" Lodge asked Craven. Craven nodded that it would. Lodge heaved himself out of the chair. "I'll get the stamp," he said. "You can fix the ballots while I'm after it." Children, he thought. Just so many children. Suspicious and selfish and frightened like cornered animals. Cornered between the converging walls of fear and guilt, trapped in the corner of their own insecurity. He walked down the stairs to the laboratories, his heels ringing on the metal treads, with the sound of his walking echoing from the hidden corners of the fear and guilt. If Henry hadn't died right now, he thought, it might have been all right. We might have muddled through. But he knew that probably was wrong, for if it had not been Henry's death, it would have been something else. They were ready for it, more than ready for it. It would not have taken much at any time in the last few weeks to have lit the fuse. He found the dye and ink pad and tramped back upstairs again. The ballots lay upon the table, and someone had found a shoebox and cut a slit out of its lid to make a ballot box. "We'll all sit over on this side of the room," said Forrester, "and we'll go up one by one and vote." And if anyone saw the ridiculous side of speaking of what they were about to do as voting, he pointedly ignored it. Lodge put the die and ink pad down on the tabletop and walked across the room to take his seat. "Who wants to start it off?" asked Forrester. No one said a word. Even afraid of this, thought Lodge. Then Maitland said he would. They sat in utter silence as each walked forward to mark a ballot, to fold it, and to drop it in the box. Each of them waited for the one to return before another walked out to the table. Finally, it was done, and Forrester went to the table, took up the box, and shook it, turning it this way and that to change the order of the ballots so that no one might guess by their position to whom they might belong. "I'll need 2 monitors," he said. His eyes looked them over. "Craven," he said. "Sue." They stood up and went forward. Forrester opened the box. He took out a ballot, unfolded it, and read it, passed it on to Dr. Lawrence, and she passed it on to Craven. "The defenseless orphan, the rustic slicker, the alien monster, the beautiful bitch, the sweet young thing." Wrong on that one, Lodge told himself. But who else could it be? She had been the last one on. She had been the 9th. Forrester went on, unfolding the ballots and reading them. "The extraterrestrial ally, the proper young man." Only 2 left now, only 2. The out-at-elbows philosopher and the mustached villain. "I'll make a guess," Lodge said to himself. "I'll make a bet. I'll bet on which one was Henry." He was the mustached villain. Forrester unfolded the last ballot and read aloud the name. "The mustached villain." "So I lose the bet," thought Lodge. He heard the rippling hiss of indrawn breath from those around him, the swift, stark terror of what the balloting had meant. For Henry's character had been the most self-assertive and dominant in last night's play. The philosopher. 8. The script in Henry's notebook was close and crabbed, with a curtness to it, much like the man himself. His symbols and his equations were a triumph of clarity, but the written words had a curious backward, petulant slant, and the phrases that he used were laconic to the point of rudeness, although whom he was being rude to, unless it were himself, was left a matter of conjecture. Maitland closed the book with a snap and shoved it away from him, out into the center of the table. "So that was it," he said. They sat in quietness, their faces pale and drawn, as if in bitter fact they might have seen the ghost of Craven's hinting. "That's the end of it," snapped Sifford. "I won't—" "You won't what?" asked Lodge. Sifford did not answer. He just sat there with his hands before him on the table, opening and closing them, making great tight fists of them, then straightening out his fingers, stretching them as if he meant by sheer power of will to bend them back farther than they were meant to go. "Henry was crazy," said Susan Lawrence curtly. "A man would have to be to dream up that sort of evidence." "As a medical person," Maitland said, "we could expect that reaction from you." "I work with life," said Susan Lawrence. "I respect it, and it is my job to preserve it as long as it can be kept within the body. I have a great compassion for the things possessing it." "Meaning we haven't?" "Meaning you have to live with it, and come to know it for its power and greatness, for the fine thing that it is, before you can appreciate or understand its wondrous qualities." "But Susan—" "And I know," she said, rushing on to head him off, "I know that it is more than decay and breakdown, more than the senility of matter. It is something greater than disease. To argue that life is the final step to which matter is reduced, the final degradation of the nobility of soil and ore and water, is to argue that a static, unintelligent, purposeless existence is the norm of the universe." "We're getting all tangled up semantically," suggested Forrester. "As living things, the terms we use have no comparative values with the terms that might be used for universal purpose, even if we knew those universal terms." "Which we don't," said Helen Gray. "What you say would be true especially if what Henry had thought he had found was right." "We'll check Henry's notes," Lodge told them grimly. "We'll follow him step by step. I think he's wrong, but on the chance he isn't, we can't pass up an angle." Sifford bristled. "You mean even if he were right, you would go ahead? That you would use even so humanly degrading a piece of evidence to achieve our purpose?" "Of course I would," said Lodge. "If life is a disease and a senility, all right then, it is disease and senility. As Kent and Helen pointed out, the terms are not comparative when used in a universal sense. What is poison for the universe is life for us. If Henry was right, his discovery is no more than the uncovering of a fact that has existed since time untold." "You don't know what you're saying," Sifford said. "But I do," Lodge told him bluntly. "You have grown neurotic, you and some of the others. Maybe I myself, maybe all of us. We are ruled by fear. You by the fear of your job, I by the fear that the job will not be done. We've been penned up. We've been beating out our brains against the stone walls of our conscience and a moral value suddenly furbished up and polished until it shines like the shield of Galahad. Back on the earth, you wouldn't give this thing a second thought. You'd gulp a little, maybe, then you'd swallow it if it were proved true, and you'd go ahead to track down that principle of decay and of disease that we happen to call life. The principle itself would be only one more factor for your consideration, one more tool to work with, another bit of knowledge. But here, you claw at the wall and scream." "Bayard!" shouted Forrester. "Bayard, you can't—" "I can," Lodge told him. "And I am. I'm sick of all their whimpering and baying. I'm tired of spoon-fed fanatics who drone themselves to their own fanaticism by their own synthetic fears. It takes men and women with knife-sharp minds to lick this thing we're after. It takes guts and intelligence. Craven was white-lipped with fury. "We've worked," he shouted, "even when everything within us, even when all our decency and intelligence and our religious instincts told us not to work. We worked. And don't say you kept us at it, you with your mealy words and your kidding and your backslapping. Don't say you laughed us into it." Forrester pounded the table with a fist. "Let's quit this arguing," he cried. "Let's get down to cases." Craven settled back in his chair, face still white with anger. Sifford kept on making fists. "Henry wrote a conclusion," said Forrester. "Well, hardly a conclusion. Let's call it a suspicion. Now, what do you want to do about it? Ignore it? Run from it? Test it for its proof?" "I say test it," Craven said. "It was Henry's work. Henry's gone and can't speak for his own beliefs. We owe at least that much to him." "If it can be tested," Maitland qualified. "To me, it sounds more like philosophy than science." "Philosophy runs hand in hand with science," said Alice Page. "We can't simply brush it off because it sounds involved." "Well, I didn't say involved," Maitland objected. "What I meant was, oh hell, let's go ahead and check it." "Check it," Sifford said. He swung around on Lodge. "And if it checks out, if it comes anywhere near to checking, if we can't utterly disprove it, I'm quitting. I'm serving notice now." "That's your privilege, Sifford. Any time you wish." "It might be hard to prove anything one way or the other," said Helen Gray. "It might not be any easier to disprove than prove." Lodge saw Sue Lawrence looking at him, and there was grim laughter and something of grudging admiration and a touch of confused cynicism in her face, as if she might be saying to him, "Well, you've done it again. I didn't think you would, not this time I didn't. But you did, although you won't always do it. There'll come a time—" "Want to bet?" he whispered at her. She said, "Cyanide." And although he laughed back at her, he knew that she was right, righter than she knew. For the time had already come, and this was the end of Life Team number 3. They would go on, of course, stung by the challenge Henry Griffith had written in his notebook, still doggedly true to their training and their charge, but the heart was out of them, the fear and the prejudice too deeply ingrained within their souls, the confused tangle of their thinking too much a part of them. If Henry Griffith had sought to sabotage the project, Lodge told himself, he had done it perfectly. In death, he had done it far better than he could have, alive. He seemed to hear in the room the dry, acerbic chuckling of the man, and he wondered at the imagined chuckle, for Henry had had no humor in him. Although Henry had been the out-at-elbows philosopher, and it was hard to think of Henry as that sort of character, an old humbug who hid behind a polished manner and a golden tongue, for there was nothing of the humbug in Henry either, and his manner was not polished, nor did he have the golden gift of words. He slouched, and he rarely talked, and when he did, he growled. A joker, Lodge thought. Had he been, after all, a joker? Could he have used the philosopher to lampoon the rest of them? A character who derided them and they not knowing it? He shook his head, arguing with himself. If the philosopher had kidded them, it had been gentle kidding, so gentle that none of them had known it was going on, so subtle that it had slid off them without notice. But that wasn't the terrifying aspect of it, that Henry might have been quietly making fun of them. The terrifying thing was that the philosopher had been second on the stage. He had followed the rustic slicker, and during the whole time had been much in evidence, munching on the turkey leg and waving it to emphasize the running fire of pompous talk that had never slacked. The philosopher had been, in fact, the most prominent player in the entire play, and that meant that no one could have put him on the stage, for no one in the first place could have known so soon of which of the 9 was Henry's character, and no one, not having handled him before, could have put the philosopher so realistically through his paces. And none of those who had sent on their characters early in the play could have handled 2 characters convincingly for any length of time, especially when the philosopher had talked all the blessed time. And that would cancel out at least 4 of those sitting in the room, which could mean that there was a ghost, or that the machine itself retained a memory, or that the 8 of them had suffered mass hallucination. He considered that last alternative, and it wilted in the middle. So did the other 2. None of the 3 made sense. Not any of it made sense. None of it at all. Take a team of trained men and women, trained objectively, trained to look for facts, conditioned to skepticism and impatience of anything outside the pale of fact. What did it take to wreck a team like that? Not simply the cabin fever of a lonely asteroid, not simply the nagging of awakened conscience against well-established ethics, not the atavistic Transylvanian fear of ghosts. There was some other factor. Another factor that had not been thought of yet, like the new approach that Maitland had talked about at dinner, saying they would have to take a new direction to uncover the secret that they sought. "We're going at it wrong," Maitland had said. "We'll have to find a new approach." And Maitland had meant, without saying so, that in their research the old methods of ferreting out the facts were no longer valid, that the scientific mind had operated for so long in the one worn groove that it knew no other, that they must seek some fresh concept to arrive at the fact of life. Had Henry, Lodge wondered, supplied the fresh approach, and in the supplying of it and in dying, wrecked the team as well? Or was there another factor? As Maitland had said, there must be a new approach, a factor that did not fit in with conventional thinking or standard psychology. The play, he wondered. Was the play a factor? Had the play, designed to keep the team intact and sane, somehow turned into a two-edged sword? They were rising from the table now, ready to leave, ready to go to their rooms and to dress for dinner. And after dinner there would be the play again. Habit, Lodge thought. Even with the whole thing gone to pot, they still conformed to habit. They would dress for dinner. They would stage the play. They would go back tomorrow morning to their workrooms, and they'd work again. But the work would be a futile work, for the dedicated purpose of their calling had been burned out of them by fear, by the conflict of their souls, by death, by ghosts. Someone touched his elbow, and he saw that Forrester stood beside him. "Well, Kent, how do you feel?" "Okay," said Lodge. Then he said, "You know, of course, it's over." "We'll try again," said Forrester. Lodge shook his head. "Not me. You, maybe. You're a younger man than I. I'm burned out, too." 9. The play started in where it had left off the night before, with the sweet young thing coming on the stage, and all the others there, with the out-at-elbows philosopher, rubbing his hands together smugly and saying, "Now this is a cozy situation. All of us are here." Sweet young thing, tripping lightly. "Why, philosopher, I know that I'm late, but what a thing to say. Of course we're all here. I was unavoidably detained." Rustic Slicker, speaking aside with a rural leer. "By a Tom Collins and a slot machine." Alien monster, sticking out its head from behind the tree. "Just Herstelgen," Verglatter Tusk. And there was something wrong, Lodge told himself. There was a certain mechanical wrongness, something out of place, a horrifying alienness that sent a shiver through you even when you couldn't spot the alienness. There was something wrong with the philosopher, and the wrongness was not that he should not be there, but something else entirely. There was a wrongness about the sweet young thing, and the proper young man, and the beautiful bitch, and all the others. There was a great deal wrong with the rustic slicker, and he, Bayard Lodge, knew the rustic slicker as he knew no other man, knew the blood and guts and brains of him, knew his thoughts and dreams and his hidden yearnings, his clodhopperish conceit, his smart aleck snicker, the burning inferiority complex that drove him to social exhibitionism. He knew him as every member of the audience must know his own character, as something more than an imagined person, as someone than another person, something more than friend, for the bond was strong, the bond of the created and creator. And tonight the rustic slicker had drawn a little way apart, had cut the apron strings, had stood on his own with the first dawning of independence. The philosopher was saying, "It's quite natural that I should have commented on all of us being here, for one of us is dead." There was no gasp from the audience, no hiss of indrawn breath, no stir, but you could feel the tension snap tight like a whining violin string. "We have been consciences," said the mustached villain, "projected conscience playing out our parts." The rustic slicker said, "The consciences of mankind." Lodge half rose out of his chair. "I didn't make him say that. I didn't want him to say that. I thought it, that was all. So help me God, I just thought it. That was all." And now he knew what was wrong. At last he knew the strangeness of the characters this night. They weren't on the screen at all. They were on the stage, the little width of stage which ran before the screen. They were no longer projected imaginations. They were flesh and blood. They were mental puppets came to sudden life. He sat there, cold at the thought of it, cold and rigid in the quickening knowledge that by the power of mind alone, by the power of mind and electronic mysteries, man had created life. "A new approach," Maitland had said. Oh, Lord, a new approach. They had failed at their work and triumphed in their play, and there'd be no longer any need of life teams grubbing down into that gray area where life and death were interchangeable. To make a human monster, you'd sit before a screen and you'd dream him up, bone by bone, hair by hair, brains, innards, special abilities, and all. There'd be monsters by the billions to plant on those other planets, and the monsters would be human, for they'd be dreamed by brother humans working from a blueprint. In just a little while, the characters would step down off the stage and would mingle with them. And their creators? What would their creators do? Go screaming, raving mad? What would he say to the rustic slicker? What could he say to the rustic slicker? And more to the point, what would the rustic slicker have to say to him? He sat, unable to move, unable to say a word or cry out a warning, waiting for the moment when they would step down.